What if the signs of the end times are not something we're waiting for, but something we're already living through? Not as sudden, dramatic events. Not as unmistakable disruptions. But as patterns, quietly forming. Steadily aligning. Hidden in plain sight. For generations, people have asked the same question: how will we know? How will we recognize the moment when history begins to shift? When the world moves from what it has always been into something fundamentally different? And according to biblical prophecy, the answer was never meant to be hidden. Because the signs were never described as a single event. They were described as a pattern. A sequence of changes, across systems, across societies, and within human behavior itself. For most of history, these patterns were difficult to identify. Not because they didn't exist, but because the world had not yet developed to the point where they could fully emerge. But today, that is no longer the case. The concept of signs is often misunderstood. People expect clarity in the form of extremes. Something obvious. Something undeniable. Something that demands immediate attention. But real signs rarely operate that way. They do not overwhelm. They accumulate. They build slowly. Over time. Until they form something recognizable. Because a sign is not defined by intensity. It is defined by direction. And direction can only be seen when patterns are observed as a whole. One of the most defining characteristics of our time is global integration. The world is no longer a collection of isolated systems. It is a network. Economies are interdependent. Technologies are interconnected. Information moves without barrier. What happens in one part of the world no longer stays there. It spreads instantly. This level of connection has never existed before in human history. And it aligns precisely with a world described in prophecy, not divided, but unified. Not isolated, but interdependent. A world functioning as one. But connection alone does not define a system. Structure does. And alongside global integration, we are witnessing the rise of increasingly complex systems. Financial systems. Digital infrastructures. Identity frameworks. Each designed to solve problems. Each designed to improve efficiency. Each designed to simplify life. But when these systems begin to merge, they form something larger. A framework. And the more unified that framework becomes, the more influence it exerts. Because systems do not just serve people. Over time, they begin to shape them. The signs are not only visible in the external world. They are reflected internally. In how people think. How they respond. How they process reality. Attention is fragmented. Focus is constantly interrupted. Awareness is diluted by an overwhelming flow of information. People are more connected than ever before. Yet often less aware of the larger picture. And this matters. Because recognizing patterns requires stillness. It requires the ability to step back and observe. And in a world designed for constant engagement, that ability becomes increasingly rare. One of the most powerful forces shaping this moment is normalization. Change, when introduced gradually, loses its sense of significance. What once seemed unusual becomes familiar. What once raised questions becomes accepted. And what becomes accepted eventually becomes invisible. This is how transformation occurs at scale. Not through force, but through adaptation. Through repeated exposure. Through quiet acceptance. Until the new reality feels indistinguishable from what came before. The concept of deception in prophecy is often misunderstood. It is not described as something easily identifiable. Not blatant lies. Not obvious contradictions. But something far more refined. Subtle distortions. Partial truths. Narratives that feel accurate, while guiding perception in a different direction. And in a world saturated with information, the challenge is no longer access to knowledge. It is discernment. The ability to distinguish what is true from what merely appears to be. Another defining feature of this moment is acceleration. Everything is moving faster. Technological development. Cultural shifts. Global events. What once unfolded over decades now unfolds in years. Or even months. This acceleration compresses time. And when time compresses, transformation intensifies. The pace of change becomes difficult to track. And when change becomes difficult to track, it becomes easier to accept. Without reflection, there is something else happening, something less visible, but widely felt. A growing sense that the world is shifting, that something beneath the surface is changing. People may not articulate it clearly. They may not understand it fully. But they feel it. And that feeling is not random. It is recognition. Not conscious, but intuitive. A response to patterns that are becoming increasingly aligned. Most people will miss these signs. Not because they are hidden, but because they are subtle. Because they are gradual. Because they are embedded within everyday life. People tend to look for extremes. Dramatic events. Clear disruptions. But the most significant changes in history rarely announce themselves that way. They unfold quietly. Consistently. Until they are complete. When you step back and connect everything, global integration, systemic structure, behavioral shifts, acceleration, normalization, a pattern emerges. Not chaos. Not randomness. But alignment. A world moving, deliberately, consistently, toward something structured, something unified, something described long before it existed. The signs were never meant to overwhelm. They were meant to be recognized. Through observation. Through awareness. Through the ability to see beyond individual events. And understand the pattern they form together. And today, for the first time, those patterns are no longer distant. They are present. Not fully complete, but clearly visible. And that changes the nature of the question. Because the question is no longer, will the signs appear? The question is, will they be recognized before they are fully realized? And if these signs are already visible, then the next question becomes unavoidable. How does the system behind them actually work? Because the signs are only indicators. The structure behind them is what gives them meaning. If you haven't seen the breakdown of how this system is being built, watch that next. Because once you connect the signs to the system behind them, you don't just see the present more clearly, you begin to understand where it's going. And if you want to keep seeing what most people overlook, subscribe. Because this is only the surface.